Welcome to Amateur Activist. It's your host, Isabela Herrera, and this is the podcast where we attempt to change the world. Every episode, I'll bring you relevant and relatable conversations to equip you to be amateur activists. New episodes every other Friday, so strap in and get ready to dive into big conversations as we embrace our inner activist. Hello, amateur activists, and welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Isabela Herrera, and I am so excited for this week's episode because I am joined by David Hayward, better known as NakedPastor. David had about 30 years in ministry before leaving officially in 2010 and dedicated his time and energy full-time to NakedPastor, writing, speaking, drawing, and creating the cartoons we all know and love. Most of David's cartoons center around deconstruction, people's spiritual journeys, and freedom of thought. I fell in love with David's artwork because it was a visualization of so much of what I was feeling and continue to feel as someone who has left their local church and is a few years into their deconstruction. In this episode, David and I talk about just that. Leaving ministry, navigating relationships when two people are on very different journeys or different part of the journeys. What does deconstruction look like as a way of life and not just a phase? And is reconstruction really necessary? Thank you to each and every one of you that takes the time to tune in and listen to Amateur Activist. As we finish up our first season of the podcast, it would mean a lot if you took a minute and followed the podcast on whichever app you're listening on, rated the podcast, and left me a review. I really appreciate it. Now, let's get into this episode on leaving, healing, and life after ministry with David Hayward, the Naked Pastor. Welcome back to another episode of Amateur Activist. I am your host, Isabela, and this week I am joined by David Hayward. Welcome, David. Just want to say a big welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and hello everyone out there. Good to be with you.
So for those that may not know you as David and may know you as Naked Pastor, could you give us a little background into who you are for those that may not know you as a person?
Yeah, that's right. I get it a lot where people are like, you probably don't know who David Hayward is, but you might know who Naked Pastor is. So I'm the Naked Pastor. I basically, long story short, I grew up in a Christian home, grew up in the church, different churches. We moved around, and so we moved around to different churches. And eventually we ended up in a Baptist church where I got saved. Then we ended up in a Pentecostal church. I ended up going to Pentecostal Bible College. I was really, really, really devoted, in deep into the Bible. I went to Bible college. That's where I met Lisa. I started studying Greek and Hebrew. Um, went to seminary and got my master's in New Testament studies, more Greek and Hebrew. And then I went to start my PhD in New Testament studies, but we got pregnant and that sort of derailed us. And I ended up in the ministry. I got ordained as a Presbyterian minister in Canada. And then, so we served the church from then on as pastors. I roughly served for about 30 years. And in 2010, after a long, long time of my own personal development, spiritual growth, deconstructing everything at once. In 2010, I left the ministry and decided to put all my effort into a blog that I'd been running for about 5 years, Naked Pastor, and see if I could make a go of it full time. And it worked. So that's what I do. I left the ministry 2010. It's 2022 now. And so for 12 years, I've been pretty much doing Naked Pastor full time. And that means my cartoons and my books and my videos and my speaking and coaching and, art and all kinds of stuff. So
That's so surprising to me that you kind of fell into ministry by, air quotes accident after spending so many years, I guess, dedicated to like the academic side of
Yes.
like theology and kind of church life.
Yeah, it
Is that
is.
still a passion of yours?
Well, that's a really, really good observation, and one that means a lot to me. I A lot of people said, "So you were called to the ministry," and blah blah. Blah. And I'm like, I'm not, I'm not really absolutely sure. That's something I really, really struggled with.
Mm,
My friends who I got ordained with, they were absolutely certain, like they'd heard from
right.
God, and this is what they're calling and everything.
Mm,
And I was I was stuck. I was at the University of Toronto. I was in my PhD program. We we got pregnant. We were out of money. It costs a lot of money to do a PhD, especially in Toronto. And the president of another Presbyterian college at McGill University in Montreal gave me an
mm,
offer. Said, "Come study with us, do another year, get a ministry degree,
mm,
and we'll give you a home, and you can be a student pastor while you do that.
right.
And then at the end of that, we'll ordain you, and we'll give you a charge somewhere in Canada, wherever you want." And it was like an offer I couldn't turn down,
Right.
for the sake of my family and
Yeah.
everything. And so yeah, you're right. I kind of ended up there by accident. And but I'm a very responsible person.
Yeah.
I believe in the church, and the value of community and all that kind of thing.
Mm,
So I devoted everything to the ministry, but I really focused a lot on the teaching aspect. So
right.
I never dropped my Greek or dropped my Hebrew
Yeah.
or whatever. I used it to study and prepare for sermons
Mm,
and you know Bible studies and all that kind of thing. So
yeah.
it helped, but yeah, the interesting thing is when you're an academic, people don't matter.
Yeah.
Uh, and academia does, whereas in
Mm,
the church academia doesn't seem to matter and people do.
yeah.
So I had to sort of uh, learn that
Mm.
whole aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just in June finished my bachelor's of theology with like specializing in Greek. And I had this tension similar to what you're describing of I tend to lean more towards academics. I'm very like I want to learn, and
Right.
it was a big catalyst for my deconstruction. But also like I don't have any desire to work for a church or be in air quotes like traditional ministry. And so I let people fuel what classes I took and what I wanted to learn. And so I
Yeah.
guess, do you think that having more of that academic side um, became kind of a catalyst or a starting point for your deconstruction, or kind of what you kind of describe in your art now? Or was it completely separate? Did it
Oh
help? Did
no.
it?
Yeah. So you're studying. You're majoring in Greek.
Yeah, I did. I finished Greek. Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, well, that's fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah.
when I was in my bachelor's, I got like 2 years of Greek and a year of Hebrew, and then when I went to Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in Boston, I kept taking Greek.
Hmm.
To the point where we at lunchtime we would go and do Greek speed reading through the New Testament. And such a geek,
Yeah.
and but I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I did a
But
year of Greek, and I wish that I had the opportunity to take Hebrew, because I am obsessed with the with Israel scriptures, with the Old Testament. Um,
mhm.
but
Well,
yeah, no, I still hold on to my Greek.
yeah. Do you have plans to go on in
Yes,
your
yeah,
master's?
I would love to do my master's of theology. Did I focused on Mujarista theology, like Latin American feminist theology. And I think that's where I would want to focus my research for my master's. Yeah.
That's powerful. Yeah, go for it. Do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we need that. I love that
Yeah.
feminist liberation theology. That'd
Yes.
be very cool.
Especially
Yeah.
like I focused specifically on like the Holy Spirit and how Mujarista theology and liberation theology can inform Pentecostal theology. It's the tradition I grew up with. So it's a big passion of mine. I think that's where I would want to go for my master's.
It's interesting. I heard an interview. This was years ago, of how Roman Catholic, of course, is very popular in South
Mhm.
America, Central America, but Pentecostalism was on the rise too. And a lot of people sort of look down on Pentecostalism.
Mhm.
I was That's where I was. I was in Pentecostalism too
Okay.
for many years, and kind of looked down on it. The whole speaking in tongues thing and everything.
Mhm.
But the woman that was being interviewed, it was CBC Radio, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. She was saying it's a Pentecostalism provided a avenue of liberation for people that
Mm.
were living in under very oppressive kind of uh, religious and political
Mm.
um, environments. And Pentecostalism provided a form of liberation for
Wow.
people, and including speaking in tongues.
Mm.
Was where all your speech and everything was kind of monitored,
Right.
and where speaking in tongues, it's
Yeah.
not monitored, and it was a very powerful form of freedom for people. And it gave
Wow.
me a sort of a it corrected my
Mhm.
tendency to criticize, speaking in tongues and everything is not
Yeah.
real or whatever.
Right.
But for many people, it was actually a form of exercising and manifesting their own desire for
Yeah.
liberation and everything. So I
Wow.
think that's I think that's really important. But
Yeah.
yeah, like Greek and Hebrew, and I even took Aramaic.
Oh,
There's only
wow.
one, there's only one letter in the book of Daniel that's Aramaic, and I took Aramaic for the whole semester just for that. And then theological French, theological German, all preparing for
Yeah.
my PhD. You need all those
Right.
things, and I was into it. I loved it, and writing papers,
Mhm.
and uh, but for me, what happened was at the end of my master's, I I'd finished all my studied, written all my papers, written my exams, and you know, I I was graduating cum laude and everything. I was very
Mhm.
very happy
Yeah.
and done very well, and I I was down at Harvard, Harvard Coop,
Mhm.
and there was a bookstore there, and I was wandering through and saw a book, and I picked it up, and sort of interested in me, and I had some free time, and so I read this book. It's called The Silence of Jesus by James Breach, and
Mhm.
so this was back in 82 or 3,
Mhm.
and I read this book, and basically his thesis is that there's about 7 sayings of Jesus that scholars generally agree are actual sayings of Jesus, and the rest are, you know, written into the mouth of Jesus.
Right.
And then he went on to sort of apply a Nietzschean hermeneutic to
Mhm.
these sayings of Jesus. And anyway, it was, here I'd been going to an evangelical seminary, and then I read this book, and it totally messed me up.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
to the point where up to that point, I'd never really questioned the inspiration of Scripture.
Right.
The three I's: the inspiration, infallibility, and inerrancy
Mm.
of Scripture. I didn't really question. I questioned 6 day creation. I
Right.
questioned Jonah and
Mhm.
the whale, and I questioned,
Yeah.
the flood, those things, but not the, right down to the sayings of Jesus and everything.
Right.
I was devastated. And on the day of my graduation, I was actually in my robe and everything, and I was freaking out. My wife actually had to literally grab me by the shoulder and say, "You've got to go to your graduation ceremony." And I was just freaking out. And that was the beginning of my deconstruction,
Yeah.
way back then,
Yeah.
at my graduation, on my graduation day.
Mm.
And so for me, it culminated in 2009. Um, and eventually that led to my leaving the ministry.
Yeah. Do
Mm.
you do you how do I want to phrase this? Because I know that you've left, I guess, traditional ministry, but I think that what you do and what you've done for the last 12 years is ministry. The amount of people that you're reaching and the amount of um how you put a collective feeling and experience into your cartoons and into your art is in and of itself is ministry. And so do you connect to that? Do you still
Mm.
do you consider what you do and what you've done a sort of ministry, or is it completely disconnected for you?
Well, um, th- that's a really interesting question. So when I left the ministry in 2010, I
Mhm.
struggled over whether to keep the name Naked Pastor because I wasn't a pastor anymore,
Right.
in the literal sense.
Yeah.
And so I I really wrestled with that. So I thought, well, maybe Naked Pastor means a pastor without his church on or something like that.
Mm.
And but I had enough people like you tell me, look, you don't pastor a local church, but you're certainly doing the same kind of thing you did, but online,
Mhm.
virtually.
Yeah.
And so I decided to keep the name Naked Pastor.
Mm.
So the problem with this is that uh, we keep trying. The church and religion has had such a powerful molding effect on our life, and it creates categories and creates
Mm.
definitions and creates paradigms so that for many people, if you're not pastoring a church, you're not a pastor,
Right.
that kind of thing. And so for me, part of my deconstruction is giving up that whole, uh, worldview.
Mm.
It, deconstruction just doesn't mean you're deconstructing certain beliefs. It means you question everything,
Right.
and everything gets tossed into the tumbler,
Mm.
and uh, you don't know how things are going to come out. And you know, I think of in the Gospels the story of Jesus where he didn't fit categories,
Mm.
traditional categories, and that confused people and even angered people. And the
Mm.
same thing with Paul, whether or not you like Paul or not. One of the things he claimed was that his authority came from above and not from any church authority,
Right.
and that disturbed and upset
Mm.
people and frustrated people.
Yeah.
And maybe people like me fall into that kind of tradition where it's like if the church says, well, you're not a pastor because you don't have a church,
Mm.
and I can just say, well, you're wrong.
Mm.
I'm still doing the work,
Yeah.
actually, and I feel like I am. I
Yeah.
still feel like I'm doing the work of a pastor.
Mm.
I'm and even though I don't fit any definition, it's kind of like John Wesley, I think it was, who said, "The world is my parish," and
Mm.
I kind of feel that way, where the people I'm helping are all around the world and not just stuck here in a local building.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, the impact is,
including Australia.
yeah, here we are. It's I was saying to someone today that I was going to talk with you tonight, and they were like, who's Naked Pastor? That's such an odd name. And I was like, you'll know his cartoons. And they were like, I doubt it. And this is someone from work, and they pulled it up and we're like, oh, actually I have seen these before. And I'm like, it's just like the reach is insane. And not only
Wow.
the reach, but the ability to connect with something regardless of um, whether you're in church still or not, whether you consider yourself a Christian or not, whether you're progressive or conservative, whether you're whatever.
Mhm.
There's something that can be felt in the soul and the spirit when looking at your artwork that I think especially with COVID in the last few years with like the digital church and online church, there is a pastoral element to your art that I
Mm.
think um, kind of elevates how impactful it is.
Well, thanks a
So,
lot,
of
Isabella. That means a lot, really. It's
course.
encouraging. Yeah, and it's funny. I, uh, I love that story because I hear
Yeah.
that a lot where people are like, I and and you're right. There's people from right across the spectrum. That's what I really love about the community that I find myself in
Mm,
online is that there's church-going believers and
yep.
pastors, and then there's agnostics and agnostic atheists and people. I even yesterday somebody says, "I've never been religious, but I love your work,"
Yeah.
you know, and
Yep.
and it's just kind of cool the wide diversity
Hmm.
of expressions that I find myself surrounded by, and
Mm,
that's really encouraging to me. Recently, I was down in Salt Lake City, Utah.
mm,
Um, they invited me down to come and speak to a group of Mormons and ex-Mormons, LGBTQ
yeah.
folk, and their family and friends. I was like, talk about niche.
Yeah.
Uh, and it was very, very interesting,
Mm,
fascinating, and fun. Like
yeah.
I had a lot of fun, and there were hundreds of people there at this event, and I spoke and I shared my stories and I shared my
Mm,
cartoons on the
mm,
slide show as I spoke, and it was just, and it was being held in this huge convention center where there were a bunch of other events happening in
mm.
different rooms and different, uh, you know, venues in this huge facility. And some people came up to me after and were like, I was at another event and I saw Naked Pastor was going to be here, so I skipped that one and came to this one. So
So
it's like
funny.
it's really cool the reach Naked Pastors had. And
Hmm.
yeah, I think COVID has helped that because a lot of people have been stuck at home
Yeah.
and have been online, and my work tends to get shared. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah. I do you were you and your wife Lisa going through this deconstruction or the separation from ministry at the same time, or was it different times? And if it was different, how how is navigating that? Or how, if it was
Yeah,
together, was that, did it make it a little bit easier knowing that you had a partner or someone that could kind of do this journey with you?
right. That's that's something I really care about, so much so that I wrote a book
Okay.
about it called "Till Doubt Do Us Part: When
Mm,
Changing Beliefs Change Your Marriage," which is basically a bunch of posts I did around my own story
mhm,
and realizing that a lot of people who are deconstructing are going through that difficult, traumatic time of great
mm,
tension and fear. And so for Lisa and I, we met in Bible college. We were really young. Lisa was 19 when we got married. I was
mm,
21. And, we've been serving the church basically side by side all those years.
mm,
And never, we were growing together um, theologically,
mm,
but we were in the church and serving together side by side. It was when we realized that my deconstruction was going to start interfering with my
right.
role as a pastor in a local congregation.
Mm,
When, people were starting to question, okay, my beliefs. I
mm,
wasn't just questioning my beliefs, other people were
yeah.
questioning my beliefs. And that's in 2009 when I had a profound kind of flash of insight or whatever, where I saw the oneness of all things and the interconnectivity of everything,
Mm,
and and saw that there's just one reality but many beliefs or
mhm,
interpretations of that reality, and even more attempts to try to describe that reality. It was a very profound experience for me, and not chemically induced or anything. um, and and I started just sort of, I'll admit, kind of naively sharing this profound experience that I'd had, and how it, Christianity fit into all this, and the church and belief. And um, that's when people started saying, whoa, 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 this
mm,
is going too far.
mm,
And I realized then, and I realized then my trajectory of spiritual growth was going to start um, conflicting with my role as a pastor at this church.
Right.
And I knew one day I would leave the ministry, but I didn't know how I would know I should.
Right. Mm.
And it was at a certain meeting where I realized, okay, m- my need to continue growing is actually going to start hurting this church locally.
Mm.
And um, and it was. People were like
What do you mean by that?
hearing people know do you know your pastor doesn't believe in God anymore? And
Mm.
or your pastor's a universalist, or people were saying uh, God has lifted his hand of anointing off of your pastor and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. And even head office, the vineyard where I was starting to get letters of concern. And
Yeah.
I was getting phone calls saying that I should run my post through somebody else first to make sure they
Right.
were orthodox enough. And I knew I couldn't survive in that
Yeah.
context. And
Yeah.
that's why I decided to leave. So
Mm.
that's when Lisa and I started experiencing internal conflict in our marriage.
Right.
Up to that point, no problem. But
Yeah.
at this point, when it was really devastating everything,
Yeah.
um, that's when it got really, really difficult and scary to the
Mm.
point where we almost didn't make it. It took a
Yeah.
couple of years
Mm.
to find our balance again,
Yeah.
maybe three,
Yeah.
where, we realized we were in trouble. And it was like the perfect storm. I didn't just leave the ministry. Lisa went to started university at
Mm.
48 years old to get her nursing degree. Our kids had left home. We were empty nesting.
Yeah.
Um, we when I left the ministry, I was so bad off financially. We had to file for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Um, we leaving the church and the ministry. We lost our friends.
Community.
We
Yeah.
lost our support group. I lost my sense of purpose
Yeah.
uh, and meaning and destiny,
Yeah.
as a pastor. Just a perfect storm.
Yeah.
And we realized we were in trouble.
Mm.
And so I start seeking out therapy,
Mm.
counselors, coaches, you name it,
Yeah.
to try to figure this out. And it took a couple of years of renegotiating how to be
Yeah.
married for us to
Yeah.
survive. And now we're doing better than ever.
Yeah.
But it was a tough transition.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough transition, like, not even really comparable, but like in my friendship groups, right? We're at varying levels of deconstruction and our commitment to church. And for a while there was like a tension in our relationships as a group of friends who were committed to doing are committed to each other for the long term, but we weren't on the same page with a lot of things. And so I can't
Right.
even imagine, trying to figure that out with, a partner that that you're married to, that you've committed your life to.
Hmm.
So thank you for sharing that, because
Yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge and name that it's not actually an easy transition.
No, it's not. But it's an important one, and it was really important for me because it helped me to realize, like, Lisa and I, up to that point, and we'd been married, let me see, 40 years.
Mm, yeah.
And up to that point, we'd gone for counseling and all because we
Mm,
worked hard on our marriage. We were always reading books and always talking and
mm,
communicating and growing as a couple, but never did belief or anything factor in.
right.
So suddenly, though, uh, belief and spirituality and Christianity and church and ministry, all that sort of created a bomb
Mm,
that blew up
yeah.
in the middle of our relationship, and we had to renegotiate.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the glue that's keeping us together?
Mm,
Like we we had all these other things that were helping keeping us together.
right.
You know, having the same sort of mission in life with the church and
Right.
same friends,
Mm,
same sort of theology,
yeah.
the same kind of schedule, you
Hmm.
know, all those things. And then all those changed,
Right.
and including our friends. She had her own friends now at university and her own schedule as a student.
Hmm.
And then, I had no friends and no schedule and, no money and, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And so we had to sit down and renegotiate, okay, what is the glue that keeps us together? And we realized it's got to be love. It
Yeah.
can't be compatibility of um, belief
Yeah.
or lifestyle.
Yep.
And so we actually grew and matured through that time because we began
Mm,
realizing, what really holds us together is love and mutual respect
yeah.
and independence
Mm,
and autonomy.
yeah.
Maybe up to that point, we'd been a little bit entangled emotionally,
Mm,
and maybe this helped us separate into unique, autonomous individuals who needed to
yeah.
learn how to love one another as different
Yeah.
rather than just the same.
Right.
And so that was a huge growth time for us.
Yeah.
But it was valuable because now our relationship's richer and deeper than it was
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should have asked this at the beginning, but what because I guess you started deconstructing before it is what it is now, right? It's like a
Mm.
massive movement. Deconstruction is used as kind of a buzzword, or there's a connotation or an emotion people attach to it. So what for you does it mean to deconstruct, and has that changed since you started for yourself, and then now what it is now for people?
So, I'm not willing to go to war over this,
Yeah.
but back in 2008, I was invited to go to this was when I was still in the ministry. I was invited to go to a workshop seminar with a theologian um, to talk about hermeneutics
Hmm.
and how to study the scriptures and all that. And we were um, told to have all these different books read by then. And they were all books that were talking about like different philosophies and approaches to text. And one of those was deconstruction. Like Derrida is a French
Mm-hmm.
philosopher who coined the word deconstruction. And basically, it's where you question everything. You question everything about the text. You question the author's intention. You question our ability to read objectively what was said. Everything you question everything, and that it's impossible to get the truth from a text
Mm-hmm.
because there's just so many factors involved and so on. And they wanted me to read these uh, philosophies and approaches to hermeneutics and to the text critically in a way so that I would be convinced that they were wrong. And then the whole workshop was, you know, basically that the Bible can be trusted. It's objective truth.
Right.
Don't, all these different hermeneutics like deconstruction and everything aren't to be trusted, and they're wrong in their approach to the Bible, inspiration and all that kind of thing.
Mm.
But it had the opposite effect on me. I became a convert. I
Yeah.
was like, this sort of explains what I'm going through. Like
Hmm.
I'm questioning everything.
Hmm.
It sort of gave words to that thing that started happening way back on my graduation day
Right.
when I was questioning the inspiration of scripture.
Hmm.
This whole deconstruction philosophy validated that
Mm.
suspicion.
Yeah.
And so I just started talking in that way, and I started throwing around the word deconstruction, and people were kind of like, "This was way back in 2008. Like this is 14 years ago,
Hmm.
right? Am I right? 14? Yeah."
Yes.
And people were saying you're a deconstructionist as a criticism, but I took it as a compliment.
Mm.
And And then in 2012, I started an online community called The Lasting Supper. And I was very explicit, saying to people, if you're deconstructing your beliefs, blah, 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 here's an online community where you can do that without being criticized, where you can
Mm.
vent and we'll just listen and blah, blah, blah. And then look at now, everybody's talking about deconstruction,
Yeah.
either negatively or positively.
Hmm.
And it's just become a huge a huge thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's a new name for an old thing.
Yep.
And for me, it's just questioning your beliefs.
Mm.
Now, before, when you were in the church and you started questioning your beliefs, you had two choices. One was to be open about it and then get kicked out,
Yep.
or to keep it to yourself and try to stay.
Yeah.
So those are basically the two choices.
Yeah.
Now it's normalized,
Yeah.
and you still have the two choices,
Yeah.
but we now know this process of questioning your beliefs and questioning authority and
Hmm.
all that is simply a natural and normal and healthy
Hmm.
process of growth
Yep.
in your actual life, from
Hmm.
teenager to adolescent to, young adult and everything. It's totally important and legitimate and normal and healthy to question everything.
Mm.
But this also applies to our spiritual lives as well, our
Yeah.
religious life. And before it was condemned,
Mm.
and now it's sort of become normal.
Yeah. And there's space
Uh,
for it.
yeah, that's right. But
Mm.
still, people are trying. The church is still trying to control that,
Yeah.
minimize it, or eliminate it, or whatever. Where
Mm.
now more and more people are becoming emboldened
Hmm.
and are being more open about their questions.
Yeah.
And of course, there's everything from rejecting everything
Mm.
to um, you know uh, tweaking
Hmm.
or morphing or
Hmm.
adapting or whatever. But
Hmm.
everybody goes through their own deconstruction in some way or
Yeah.
another. I
I,
claim it's a way of life, though.
yeah,
For me, it's a way of life.
that's what I was going to ask next was, I think it was your last video, one of your recent videos, you say that deconstruction a, um, isn't a phase,
Phase.
it's a way of life, it's forever. And
Right.
I wanted to, I guess, two questions, ask if you can
Yeah.
expand on that as someone that's been doing this a lot longer than a lot of the voices in the deconstruction community, or a lot longer than a lot of the millennials and Gen Zs that are kind of doing it now in churches. Um, if you can expand on that, but also, is reconstruction, does that have space in your um idea of what this means for it to be a lifelong, forever process and
Hmm.
journey?
Hmm. So, for me, deconstruction, the attitude of deconstruction is a posture,
Hmm.
and that is you question everything.
Hmm.
So that needs to happen always,
Hmm.
where you question everything that comes your way, because we're being inundated by media, by culture, by billboards, by movies, books.
Yeah.
Constantly, we're being surrounded by things that are trying to influence us
Mm.
and change us, or affect us, or motivate us, or you know
Mm.
scare us.
Yeah.
So for me, that it's this whole deconstruction thing is a posture.
Right.
And I just finished reading a biography, Isaacson's biography of Einstein,
Mm.
and like he questioned right up until the day he died
Mm.
everything, even his own theories.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm talking about: is deconstruction is a way of life. It's your ability to question everything, even what you already believe to be certain.
Right.
And so that to me is just it's just going to be my posture for forever. Now
Hmm.
I do hear people talking about reconstruction,
Hmm.
that it's okay to deconstruct as long as I did another video recently, as long as you build
Yeah,
something in its
that one as
place. But
well.
I disagree.
Mm.
I think tearing down ideologies and tearing down um, dogma and everything to create that open space,
Mm.
the open space is what you want. Well, maybe
Mm.
it's not what you want. The open space is where it's at. Like
Mm,
that's where the peace of mind is, not by
mm,
jumping into another ideology
right.
or framework.
Yeah.
And I see that happen a lot where people, they question their Christian beliefs and maybe they jump into yoga or Buddhism or Hinduism or New
Right.
Age stuff, or what. It's all fine. That's all fine, but it's not necessary, but it's
Right.
totally your choice.
Mm.
Life's a buffet. You get to choose what you eat,
Mm.
not just physically, but also spiritually or whatever. It's so totally up to you. I don't care as long as you make the choice with your own freedom,
Right.
and and try to do it as fearlessly as
Mm.
possible. So for me, the open space is where it's at.
Right.
That's where your peace of mind is, because in my way of thinking, why jump into another ideology that you're just going to have to eventually deconstruct
Deconstruct.
as
Yeah.
well?
Yeah.
So that's why I don't encourage reconstruction. It
Mm.
usually behind somebody encouraging reconstruction is they want you to come around to their way of thinking.
Yeah.
That's really what
Right.
I hear a lot of time.
Yeah.
Is what they really want is for you to cor- correct yourself
Yeah.
to think their way
And I think, and
theologically.
I've talked about this a lot with my friends and a little bit on the podcast is, for me, the last 2 years have just heightened my deconstruction and heightened um,
Hmm.
my questioning for a lot of reasons. And I found that pastors and leaders, mentors in my life were really worried that I would, backslide or fill in the blank because of this open space and because of this ability to not really, you know, I was floating for lack of a better analogy. And
Right.
instead, what I found is that through my experience of God, that He was and continues to be so kind that He continues to meet me. And I
Hmm.
didn't need the controlling aspects of, my tradition or of my church or of fill in the blank, but that He was bigger than all of that. And that the open
Hmm.
space became a lot less scary and a lot more peaceful. And it was one of those things that I was like, oh, I understand, and am grateful for the years of rules and boundaries and being told what to do. But I think I am also grateful for this freedom of deconstruction that has allowed me to widen how I experience, like, the divine and how I experience God. And I don't know if people who are pushing reconstruction really grasp that or maybe understand that there is so much freedom in having that open space like you describe.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Um, yeah. So the for me, the open space is uh, where you're free to explore,
Mm,
and that's where I've become comfortable.
yeah.
And I was just talking with somebody yesterday who is really, really wrestling with. She was saying, I I had such a close relationship with God, like an intimate relationship, and
Mm,
He was like my best friend, and blah blah blah. And now I'm not so sure about that personal God thing. I'm kind of scared, and I can't let that go. It's such a huge part of my life, and so
mm,
on. So it's scary
mm-hmm.
because we're letting go of very precious
Yeah.
beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
A belief is simply a thought that we really value.
Mm,
Like we really hold on to it strongly. It becomes emotional. It's just a thought
mm, yeah.
that we treasure.
Yeah.
And that's what a belief is. So it's letting go of those thoughts and letting it um, transform into something different, or transcend, maybe is a better word.
Yeah.
There's something that transcends.
Mm,
The word is not the thing. The thought is not the thing.
mm,
And as long as we cling to those thoughts and words, we'll never find out what is beyond,
Right.
what does transcend all of this.
Yeah.
Attempt to, that was the big thing that happened to me in 2009, that sort of flash of insight where I saw that there's just one reality, but there's a million words to try to
Right.
describe
Yeah.
it. So what's beyond the words? What's beyond the thoughts
Mm.
that we've employed in an attempt to describe it, articulate it?
Mm.
That's what I'm interested in, and
Mm.
that's what why my deconstruction will go on until my last breath.
Right.
Yeah.
What's that one or maybe two things that you, after you've deconstructed and questioned it, your life is now so much better without, or after the disentangling?
So when I when my deconstruction began, I remember the moment
Mm.
when I was freaking out because I'd finished this book and I
Yeah.
was freaking out, literally, because I'd put all my money on this horse
Mm.
of inspiration of the Bible, and it lost, and I lost all my money.
Mm.
I'm speaking allegorically, of course, but I I was completely devastated,
Mm.
and that began my whole deconstruction, and so throughout my whole ministry, I was trying to figure out, okay, I know what I'm supposed to believe on the one hand, and
Mm.
what I've been told the Bible says, and
Right.
everything, and what Christianity teaches, and so on. But I have this whole thing called life on the other hand that's telling me something else. So
Mm.
and I wasn't willing to throw either of them out.
Mm.
I couldn't just reject all Christianity and all that it had done for me. That
Mm.
brought a lot of value to my life, including theology, the
Mm.
church, ministry, all this stuff, the Bible. They were still valuable to me, and I wasn't willing to say that was all bullshit
Right.
and reject it all.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I had life with, my Buddhist friends and my atheist friends and my, you know, um, gay friends, trans friends. I couldn't
Yeah.
reconcile the two.
Yep.
And that was my struggle all the way through. I remember saying, okay, I'm going to start with the Jews, the Jewish people,
Mm-hmm.
and figure out how are they a part of, God's love. And then
Yeah.
I'll figure out the third, arm of monotheism and the Abrahamic faith,
Mm-hmm.
and that's Islam. And then I'll move out from there to maybe Buddhism and Hinduism. And then
Mm.
I had a whole plan, and I started working on this plan of figuring out how to integrate all these things. So that was my whole life, trying to integrate
Mm.
those who were outside with and feeling that they somehow belonged but didn't have any Christian theological um, rationale
Right.
for it to work. That was my struggle.
Mm.
But then in 2009, when I saw that we're all connected,
Mm.
that there's just one reality, but that we all have our different interpretations of it,
Mm.
our different apprehensions of it, our different way of explaining it, and so, but that we're deeply connected, and it's only thoughts. It's only our thoughts that seem
Yeah.
to divide us.
Interesting.
And I say seem on purpose. It
Mm.
only seems to divide us because I believe we're connected and that we're one.
Mm.
And so that's what my deconstruction did for me,
Mm.
was that it caused me to see that there's unity and diversity. That
Yeah.
even though we're very diverse, we're still one.
Mm.
And that all of our thoughts and all of our words uh, that attempt to draw lines and divide us into tribes and denominations and nations and beliefs
Mm.
and theologies, they're just thoughts.
Yeah.
And um, I value diversity, and I devalue you. I value uniqueness, and I value identity and
Mm.
all these different things. But it doesn't mean we're separate or
Right.
divided.
Right.
Yeah.
Why do you think there's this correlation of deconstructing um, and maybe becoming more progressive in your theological beliefs, and becoming more progressive in your political or social beliefs. Um,
Mhm.
is that just the nature of taking, conservative, you know, maybe evangelicals or conservative Christians and then allowing them to question that just is part of it?
So deconstruction, you'll start. For some people, it's an overnight deal
Mhm.
where they wake up one day and like, I don't believe any of this, and they just walk away.
Yep.
I know some people who did that,
Mhm.
and then for others like me, it's sort of like a corrupt code gets entered into your
Mhm.
hard drive
Yep.
and just starts corrupting everything in there and changing everything in there, and it takes years.
Mm.
And so that was my style.
Mhm.
And for me, it did. I always did lean liberal, I guess, but um, true deconstruction, isn't just a theological thing.
Right.
It isn't just spiritual,
Yeah.
because you question everything,
Yeah.
and you begin to realize, okay, when you get to the point where you realize that the church has an agenda
Mhm.
to control the masses,
Mhm.
um, I'm not, you know, that's just a matter of fact for
Yeah.
me. It's become a matter of fact for me.
Mhm.
That isn't to say I hate the church or it should be banned or it should end or whatever. That's not what I mean at all. I believe the church is a creature that we should have dominion over, and that it should be serving us rather
Mhm.
than the other way around.
Mhm.
That we shouldn't be serving the church. The church is here to serve us.
Mm.
Um, so that's why I continually call it out to live up to its mandate
Yeah.
of serving us and serving us well.
Mm.
But once you get to that point where you realize that a lot of theology and the church and everything is intent on controlling us
Mm.
and keeping us in line, then that starts to bleed out into other areas as well,
Mhm. Yeah.
like government
Yep.
or wealth
Mhm.
or education
Interesting.
or equality or job equality or
Mhm.
um, sexism,
Mhm.
race. It starts to apply to everywhere. Refugees. You
Interesting.
start realizing if we're all one and we're all equal uh, in in the spiritual plane or whatever,
Mhm.
this should be manifested on the physical plane as well.
Mm.
And so that's why I believe deconstruction, if you keep going, is going to affect your politics
Mm.
and um, race
Yeah.
and sex and gender and everything.
Wow.
I think it's inevitable.
Yeah. Is there anything about church or ministry or I guess the pastoral aspect of ministry that you miss or that you wish you could tap into more often?
Um, well, when I was in, like I said, I was in Salt Lake City a few weeks ago,
Mhm.
and I spoke at an event there, and I realized how much I miss public speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And, I had 30 plus years experience and training
Wow.
doing that.
Yeah, wow.
And I really enjoyed the dynamic of being in a room of people. Of course, this is kind of post COVID as well,
Yeah.
even though COVID isn't over yet.
Yeah.
Here in Canada, we still have hundreds of people dying a week from COVID.
Yeah.
But so it's not really over, but uh, sort of the post-COVID attitude that's
Yeah.
happening, especially in the States. There's no evidence anywhere there, although there are some people wearing masks, but it was kind of being in the same, it was cool being in the same room with a bunch of people and
Yeah.
talking and having that kind of energy. That was really cool. So I do miss that and I want to do more of that.
Mm.
So if you ever want to get me over to Australia for
Yes.
do some public speaking, I would love to do that. But so that's one thing I miss. And then it's sort of related, but being face to face with people, like
Mm.
online relationships are cool.
Yeah.
I value them. Like I'm loving hanging out with you, Isabella,
Yeah.
and I feel like I'm making a new friend, and
Yeah.
we're connecting from I don't know how many time zones away, but it's wonderful,
Mm,
and I really appreciate that. But it would be really cool though if we could be in the same room together
yeah,
over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or
yeah,
whatever, and just hanging out. That
yeah.
that had a whole different feel and dynamic to it. So
Mhm.
that's I think that's the number one pain point people feel when they leave the church is the
Yeah.
loss of community.
Yep.
And there's nothing else out there that can match it. I know I've tried.
Yeah.
I've tried different things. There's
Yeah.
nothing else that comes close. So yeah, I think that's the one thing I miss the most.
Yeah. I because you had mentioned previously that it was a moment that you knew that it was time to leave ministry in
Mhm.
2009 10 2010.
And yeah,
When do you, and I know you were in a pastoral role, but when do you know when it's time to leave and work kind of from the outside to create a community like you have with Naked Pastor versus staying and trying to create change or trying to, I feel like even I have this dream that, if I just stayed long enough, I could have made this community more inclusive, more safe, more welcoming. Um, but then it got to a point for me that my spiritual well-being was suffering, and I drew the line that actually my faith is more important. Like the health of my faith is more important than anything I could do for this church. When do you know, or when do you think, like, how do you navigate that desire for, like, I could actually change this place?
that's a really tough question because you know, um, I still get that from people where they say, "Oh, you gave up,"
Mm,
and I'm like, "Excuse me."
yeah,
Like I was there for 50 years,
yeah,
and you know, um, I didn't give up.
yeah,
No, no, I refuse that indictment
yeah.
totally.
Hmm.
Um, I felt actually it's the other way around that the
Hmm.
church gave up on me. I'll be honest
Hmm.
with you.
Mm,
Uh, if the church tried a little bit harder to understand what was happening to me
yep,
and provide space for that to happen, I'd still be there.
yep. I'm
But like every other people I know who've left the church, I could no longer keep growing or be my authentic self. I'd
yep.
come to a place where I realized that they did not want me to go any further.
Yep,
And so I like you, it's self-care
yep.
101.
Hmm.
And I realized, and not only just self-care, I wasn't just selfish. I also realized if I kept going, the church would also start to suffer.
Right.
Um, and so it was that perfect alignment of my self-care equals their self-care.
Yeah.
And then I knew it was, you know, hopefully you will see, I guess I'm talking to people out there who are listening,
Hmm.
who are wondering, should I stay and try to create change from the inside, or should I leave? And so if it gets to the point where you realize they do not want what you're offering anymore,
Mm.
they do not want it, and it's very clear. Uh, then I guess like Jesus gave the instruction, leave and wipe the dust from your sandals. Like they're not taking what you're offering.
Yeah.
There's some people who are working in communities so where there seems to be a glimmer of hope,
Mm.
and so they'll stay a little bit longer.
Yeah.
For me, it was very clear. The church was like, "You shall not pass,"
Yep.
and I realized I couldn't go any further, and my time was done.
Yeah.
I I'd invested everything I could possibly invest,
Mm.
and I was in the vineyard here in Canada. It wasn't that many years later where they actually voted to not be affirming.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I wasn't there for that
Yeah. Yeah.
because I would have left
Yeah.
after that. Anyway, so I think that's how you know when you
Mm.
realize they're not taking what you're offering,
Yeah.
and you're really it's it's a hopeless endeavor. Then if you can feel that in your bones and you know,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm wasting my time here. It's
Yeah.
time for me to go.
Yep.
Uh, Somehow do that.
Yeah.
It's very complicated though because we were taught ever since we were kids to never give up, and
Mhm.
you don't want to be a hireling
Mhm.
like the shepherd who runs away when the
Yep.
wolves come.
Mhm.
Um, and I've been accused of that, and but I hung in there for a long, long, long time.
Mhm.
And now here's the thing: I've left the ministry, but I still feel I'm in the game.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm in the game. I might not be wearing the
Yeah.
team uniform,
Yep.
and I might be breaking the rules from
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yep.
But I'm still in the game and influencing the game,
Yeah.
for sure. So even though I've left the institution or the
Yeah.
organization called the church, I'm still very much involved in it.
Yeah. I would agree. Yeah, I've been told by a mentor over the last few years that Isabella, we just need you to stay in the wrestle. We just need you, like, don't just leave. I see you wrestling with us. And I have realized that, yes, but I'm wrestling against someone that is using steroids and is creating their own rules, and it's not a fair wrestle, and I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
But like you've said, I am not out of the game. I think my wrestle is partly this podcast, partly it's my own, you know, wrestle spiritually in my bedroom trying to figure out what the hell I believe and how I'm going to move
Hmm.
forward and how I'm going to love people and love Jesus. Like, I am still wrestling. It just may not be with the institution and the way that they want me to wrestle, but I'm still here and I'm still doing it.
Hmm.
So thank you for saying that, because that's exactly how I feel. Yeah.
Well, I think the deconstruction thing is going to continue, um, in a way that, see, because the church is losing its grip on
Hmm.
the spiritual lives of people,
Yeah.
so that like you can leave and still continue your spiritual
Yep.
journey. I left and still continue my spiritual journey, and I may even, some say, continuing my ministry. And
Hmm.
so the church is losing its grip on everything, right down to the definitions of what is a Christian, who's a
Yeah.
believer, who's in, who's out, who's in ministry, who's not,
Yeah.
what is the church, what isn't.
Yep.
And so those, even though you've left an organization or so on, and so have I. I've left the ministry and everything. It does. It's like we've defied their definitions
Hmm.
and their boundaries,
Hmm.
and are, you know, um, still creating change in
Hmm.
the world
Yeah.
and in the church,
Yep.
um, that it has no control over
Yeah.
and can't control.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I do as well. I just have two more questions for you if you have the
Sure.
time. Um,
Yep.
what I mean, I'm sitting here with Naked Pastor. That your whole thing is cartoons, it's art, it's the creative. What role has um, art and creativity and community played in this journey, from when you had that overlap when you were in ministry and you had the blog and you were still
Mhm.
putting out art, to now when this is what you're doing full time?
I I've been an artist all my life.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was always painting on the side and everything, and I just started painting and drawing ever since I was a kid. And it was in 2000 and I think six. I started my blog 2005, I think. In 2006, I thought, I might try to draw a cartoon. I really love a good cartoon,
Mm-hmm.
and I just I was inspired by another person who's a cartoonist who drew a cartoon every day. I thought, I'm going to try that, just see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm going to draw a cartoon every day until I run out of ideas. I thought I'd last a couple of weeks maybe. And here I am 17 years later,
Yeah,
still drawing cartoons. And
crazy.
it took off. Like they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I love drawing a really good cartoon that gets the message across in like one split second,
And you do
and you
that.
don't have to read a 1,000-word blog
Hmm.
post.
Yeah.
And it's just powerful. It's direct.
Hmm.
It bypasses your intellect. It
Yeah.
it bypasses your defenses.
Hmm.
I mean, I have people see my cartoons and you can't unsee them. They're just so immediate,
Yep.
and people are like hate them or love them.
Yeah.
So it's just fascinating to me the effect that art has
Yeah.
in conveying meaning to
Hmm.
different people.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I keep doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the first like Naked Pastor cartoons that you had put out there? Like what were the earliest ones that you had kind of out there for people to see? Do you remember?
Oh, I'm embarrassed by the very yeah, by the very first ones. It was embarrassing, but I do remember the first one that kind of took off,
Mm.
and that was Eraser. And
Oh,
that's the
yes.
one where Jesus, well, there's a bunch of people with big fat pencils
Mhm.
that are bigger than they are, and they're drawing lines of
Mm.
separation between them, dividing them into little blocks.
Yep.
But Jesus has his his pencil upside down, and he's erasing the
Raising them.
lines.
Mhm.
And that was the first one that took off.
Mm.
So I realized I was on to something
Yeah.
when that happened. So that was
I
cool.
I love your sheep cartoons, and I mean I love all of them, but I think the ones with Jesus, and because it was one of the first times that I saw a representation of the Jesus that I met with in my room, or that I was meeting with in my life, that I was told wasn't really Jesus. It was just what I wanted him to be. And what I wanted him to be was active. I wanted him to be this active, loving, you know, I see you type of person. And your art, that's what he is. He's constantly, he's an active character. He's not just, up in the clouds watching, or in the
Right.
corner looking at, sad that his sheep or his church is hurting. He's there in it. And it was the
Yeah.
first kind of representation of like, this is it. This is the Jesus that I know. And I love this
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah, it's cool. And I hear from people who don't even believe in Jesus, or they don't, even if you don't believe Jesus was an actual historical figure,
Mhm.
or that, there's been a lot of, you know, stories and so on
Mm.
imputed to Jesus, or sayings imputed to Jesus, and so on. So even if you don't believe all of that stuff, the Gospels and
Yep.
Christian theology, people still love my cartoons with Jesus,
Yeah.
and the sheep, or the LGBTQ sheep, or the
Mhm.
trans sheep, or whatever it is. Like, I hear from people all the time who are like, you know what, I don't believe in Jesus, but I love this Jesus. This Jesus
Yeah.
is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. And that's my point, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to, explain to you now what I think about Jesus, but I love drawing pictures of Jesus as, like you say, somebody who loves and
Mm.
is radical,
Mhm.
and kicks over
Mhm.
icons
Yep.
and pushes over golden cows, and
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun.
Yeah. Just one last question to wrap up our conversation. Um, what are some ways that you take care of yourself? I think people who are, anti deconstruction, or, shit on it, don't realize how exhausting and how sometimes traumatic it can be to sit and dismantle things that, you mentioned they're precious to us, and we have an emotional tie to things, to beliefs. Um, and it can just be draining. So
Yeah.
what are some ways that you take care of yourself?
Okay. So number one is, one of the things what we get when we grow up in religion is this constant fear that we have to believe the right thing.
Mm, yep.
Part of deconstruction is that fear of having to be thinking correctly, or
Mhm.
orthodoxly, or whatever. That has to go, so that
Okay.
you free your mind from that fear of having to come to the right conclusion.
Hmm.
You got to let that go. In fact, I might do a video about that today.
Please.
You,
That,
you've got to let
wow.
that fear,
Mm.
because I don't know about you, but I was constantly told, lean not on your own lean
Yep.
not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him. You
Mm.
always had to be thinking correctly.
Yep.
That has to go.
Mm.
There's no judgment, there's no condemnation. You're not going to go to hell for thinking the wrong thing or
Mm.
being wrong or going down a bunny trail or
Wow.
whatever. So let that fear go. You don't have to come to a conclusion.
Mm.
That's the number one thing,
Mm.
is just releasing that fear.
Wow.
That releases you of a lot of stress,
Mm.
where
Yeah.
you can just say, you know what? I can just imagine. I can just think.
Yeah.
I don't need, it doesn't need to come to an orthodox conclusion.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah.
But secondly, I do a lot to take care of myself.
Mm.
Uh, I uh, I delete negative comments. I block trolls
Yeah.
and bullies.
Mm.
It's become so easy now. It's fun. Uh, and then, but I do a lot of things like breathing exercises
Mm.
and stretching, and I run and I do weights and I eat good food and I
Mm.
intermittent fast and I, you know, breathe through my nose. I read contemplative material
Mm.
and write in my journal. A lot of self care stuff. It's
Mm.
important to to take care of yourself and to do things to take. I find for me, if I take good care of my body, it sort of, for me, it works its
Yep.
way upward into my mind.
Yep.
And I used to be the other way, where I thought if I took care of my brain, it would
Mm.
take care of everything else. But for me, I need to get out of my head
Yep. I'm the same.
and just enjoy life
Yeah.
and to be in my body, be present. And for me, that's how I take care of myself.
Mm. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, David, for taking time out of your day to sit with me and sit with us, anyone who's
Yeah,
listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, for me too.
Thank you so much. Where can
Thank
people
you.
find you? Do you have a new book out? Do you have anything that people can
Oh,
help
yeah,
with
I
you?
do. Just one sec.
Yeah.
I have a new book out. I should have had this ready, but it's called Flip It Like This.
Yes. One of my other favorite cartoons is that.
Yeah. So it's Jesus showing a woman how to flip tables.
Yep.
And this just came out a couple of months ago,
Okay.
and it's a collection of my best cartoons
Okay.
out of thousands.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun. People are having fun with it.
Yeah.
It's under $20
Yeah.
US.
Yeah.
And people are getting it for themselves, but they're also uh, sending them to their pastors and to their in-laws,
Yeah.
and they're leaving it
Brilliant.
in the bathroom or in the guest room side table
Yeah.
or whatever. So, you know, shipping it to their enemies and everything. So it's a lot of fun. Yeah, and you can find me at nakedpastor.com, and from there, I'm on all social media platforms
Yeah.
everywhere as Naked Pastor.
Okay.
And
Perfect.
yeah, so that's where you can find me.
Perfect. Well, once again, thank you so much. It was great talking to you, and
Yeah,
yeah,
with you too, Isabella.
yeah, thank you. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in this episode. I'll see you next week with a brand new episode. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this episode was relevant and relatable, and that there was something in here that you can take into the everyday part of your life that can help impact an aspect of your world, and you can be your own version of an amateur activist. See you next time.